Welcome to today's webinar, Scalable Network Visibility and Security with Information Security Expert Bill Ward. My name is Angelique Medina. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Big Switch, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. The focus of today's webinar is Big Switch's Big Monitoring Fabric, an SDN fabric solution for network visibility that we refer to as a next-generation network packet broker. Big Monitoring Fabric enables network operations and security operations teams to gain comprehensive visibility into the network, as well as optimize their performance and security tools. Our guest speaker today, Bill Ward, will discuss his recent experience evaluating and finally implementing Big Monitoring Fabric for security tool deployment. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box on your webinar dashboard. If you're watching this video on demand and you have a question regarding today's topic, simply go to bigswitch.com/webinars and submit a question using the link provided. We have several handouts for today's session, including a data sheet for Big Monitoring Fabric, which is the product we will be highlighting today. We also have a white paper from Doyle Research on security monitoring, and there is a case study that we've done recently with Dubai Municipality that you'll also find. There's additional information on Big Switch Labs, and you can also go to labs.bigswitch.com to learn more about that option. You can download these again on the right-hand side. So joining me today, our speakers are Bill Ward, IT security expert, and Sean Mall, senior systems engineer from Big Switch Networks. We have a full agenda today, so let's get started. We're going to start with some context setting with Bill Ward, specifically around the drivers for next generation security and visibility. Next, Sean Mall will give us a quick overview of Big Switch. Then we'll get into a security tool use case with Big Monitoring Fabric. And finally, we've left some time over at the end to get to questions from attendees. So with that, let's kick it over to Bill. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Angelique. My previous job was a sales engineer, which meant my job was to evaluate multiple types of technologies. And when I moved to my current job, I had the ability to actually look at our network packet broker solution. And I originally was going to expand the existing solution. But when I did look at the expanding of that solution, the problem really became apparent that the value that I was actually going to get out of the product was rather low. So after kind of evaluating what value meant, which was basically the ability to achieve my main goal, satisfy a need, and solve my problems for a reasonable cost, what I found was that the network packet broker solution that I was going with just had quoted a silly number. And so that silly number just did not really capitalize on the value proposition that I was really looking for. So as I started looking around, then I found Big Switch. And so what happened was that with the relationship with, as I evaluated Big Switch, I found that it had a very good value proposition. So that is actually going to start us off with our first polling question. So the question is what would you do if you could do more than double your current monitoring capability? You can go ahead and select one of these, and then we'll show you the results in a moment. So let's see what the results are. So monitor more points in the network. That was actually one of the things that I actually really had really needed to do, was actually get more data flow, and we'll actually explore that in detail further on. Monitoring east-west traffic has been particularly useful here in the last couple of weeks as we've started looking for various types of exploits that have been happening, particularly things like WannaCry. Monitor the same amount and spend less. That was not really a goal of ours, but definitely can understand why that would be. And then we see the other two. The VMware infrastructure was particularly interesting as well as a feature and capability. So yeah, I think everyone is in agreement that that first one is a pretty high priority for us all. These basically were all functions that I actually needed. So I actually the reason why I bought this solution, the Big Switch solution, was because it actually did strike on the value propositions that I was looking for. It had a higher value to me in terms of all of those things that we just did. So I needed to be able to go and look at things that would expand easily. I work at a company that could acquire another company fairly easily, and so being able to actually expand the architecture, or we could actually redefine our entire data center strategy so we collapse multiple 3-4 data centers into one. And so the ability to expand the architecture locally was also very, very pertinent. But all of these things are basically just taking data off of the wire and moving it into a parallel network. And then from that parallel network, I still need to deliver that to something and make value out of it. So then being able to feed it into security tools. And those security tools is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, and especially ones that I'm using around open source. So the ability to actually take the various packets and extract them, save them off, or the various things that we'll talk about, brought a lot of value. And the fact that I could do that in a very easy and trivial way. I also had, because I am tapping so many places on my network, I had a lot of multiple or duplicated packets. But at the same time, I will also need to duplicate. After I deduplicate all of this, then I need to send it to multiple tools. So that's also the ability to duplicate traffic and send it to multiple tools. And all that stuff really came into the things that I was working on. But then I also found after a pretty short period of time that various other partner groups within my organization, they also needed some of the same data that I was able to extract. And so by working with them, I was able to find one tool that performed all these various functions.
Very good. With that, we are going to get into an overview of Big Switch, just to set, again, some context here. And Sean Mall, who's a Senior Systems Engineer here at Big Switch, she's going to walk us through that.
Thanks, Angelique. Again, my name is Sean Mall. I've been with Big Switch for about 2 years, and I previously came from a world of selling security solutions and evaluating some different things as well, similar to kind of what Bill had done in the past as well. So I wanted to kind of share some of those experiences and kind of why I came to Big Switch and explore, the really cool technology that's coming out that's allowing security to be more nimble, like kind of some of the requirements that Bill touched on. But provide a lot of value to customers without having them, having to spend a ton of money to get those features. And really in a world where the dynamic security and the dynamic nature of today's world is kind of necessary, and some of the older legacy solutions don't allow that flexibility and, rapid change. So let's talk about that. So for those who aren't familiar with Big Switch, we are a software-defined network company. We have 2 core solutions, and our mission was really to provide a next-generation data center switching solution, as well as a monitoring security solution. So with that, we have 2 core solutions. The first one being Big Cloud Fabric, which is our data center solution, which allows us to do automation and orchestration around VMware, OpenStack, containers, and really automate a lot of the workflows that are done very manually today, and also consolidate the amount of effort it takes from an operations perspective, being able to do it from a single pane of glass to manage an entire fabric. We also have our Big Monitoring Fabric, which is our solution that allows us to monitor different parts of the network, to dynamically steer traffic if needed, as well as look into some of the cloud monitoring features that we'll talk about in a minute. And as you notice, some of the logos down here at the bottom, Google and Facebook, we saw what they were doing very early on, and we decided to model our company and kind of our solution portfolio around those same benefits, so that our customers who weren't quite the size of Google and Facebook and didn't have the resources to engineer these types of solutions in-house, we provided a packaged solution that our customers could deploy right away without needing a huge expertise in-house to do that. The way we're able to leverage this is, if we take a look at from a capital perspective, traditional networking, you're paying a lot for hardware. Software is baked into that big hardware price, and the reason that's so expensive is because it's proprietary. A lot of R&D is spent on that, and then you're paying for support on top of that. The model that we have at Big Switch is we leverage open hardware, open commodity switches, which are very inexpensive. They're commoditized the same way that we've kind of commoditized the x86 platform. We now are able to pick from different vendors, different platforms, and then throw our switch software on top of those switches and create these fabrics that we're going to talk about. And that also includes the price of support. So when you look at just a 3-year CapEx in terms of savings on your initial purchase, there's a huge value there. And then it goes beyond that when we start looking at OpEx. Because we're building these fabric solutions, we've got a single pane of glass. Troubleshooting is faster. Configuration is much faster. ACG did a independent study on our solution specifically to look at exactly how much savings people are getting and customers are getting with the operational side of things. So at a high level, the way that we build our solution is, you can see at the top we've got our two solutions, our Big Monitoring Fabric and Big Cloud Fabric. Those are controllers that we manage the individual switches underneath the fabric with. So we're a controller-based solution. Then we have a multitude of options from Dell, Acton, EdgeCore, and another platform that we'll be announcing very soon that will allow customers to be able to choose from different vendors these open network switches, which are a lot less expensive, and replace traditional proprietary hardware that you may or may not even need those features that you're paying for today. So we're giving you the ability to build these fabrics very easily without having to break the bank. This is a good slide just to give customers an idea of kind of who we're working with today and instill a little bit of confidence. We've been around the market for a while. We've got some very huge opportunities with existing customers. Some of these logos you can see below. So the point of this slide is really to show that we can actually deliver on what we're talking about, and that's really what I'd like to get out of this particular spot here. So now let's focus in on Big Monitoring Fabric and just give you an idea of how we kind of really get in the weeds of building these fabrics and how we're able to give Bill all those benefits that he just talked about. So if you look at a traditional packet broker, the way that they're typically set up is you buy a chassis type of solution. You're paying for that expensive chassis because it's proprietary hardware. You've got to figure out in 4 to 5 year time frame how big you actually need, because you've got to buy a chassis that big today. And trying to scale that is not very easy either, because it's not centrally managed. It's still box by box configuration and troubleshooting, very proprietary and expensive to do that. Now comes along the next generation packet broker from Big Switch. We're able to build out a fabric using those commodities, 1 RU switches, which gives us the ability to do 1 gig, 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig. And when you start looking at traditional packet brokers, especially in terms of higher speed and throughput ports, those become very expensive per port when you look at a commodity-based switch. So we leverage a bunch of these switches to build out these fabrics managed by a single controller and operated as a single fabric, which ultimately gives you a huge savings in not only the cost up front, but operationally as you manage this and grow this out in the future. Here we give you an idea of all the things that you can monitor with our solution. Using the single fabric, single controller approach, we have plugins with our Big Monitoring service node that allows us to do things like packet deduplication, packet slicing, time stamping, all those things. We also have an analytics platform that allows you to monitor, not only feed your tools, but get some correlatable data and be able to see what's going on in your network as well. And we do things from physical to virtual to cloud. And the tools you'll see on the right, all these tools are tools that most organizations are looking at, or if they don't already have them, or they're using them today and looking to grow these tools as their needs grow, especially when it comes to security. And as Bill's going to talk about in a minute, security is a huge pusher and driver for these types of solutions. So if we kind of look at a breakdown of the fabric and then its different components, what we typically do is on the bottom left of the slide, we see production network. And you can take a tap of your existing network, a span, and feed into our fabric on the left. And then as that traffic enters our fabric, now we can start to do some cool things with it. We can filter on that traffic, we can deduplicate that traffic, we can replicate that traffic to multiple tools from one source. And on the right is where we could have all our delivery tools. So we can take traffic from anywhere in this fabric and feed it to anywhere in the fabric and have that traffic manipulated as needed. We also have an inline solution that allows us to selectively steer traffic in line. And just to point out, everything we've been talking about so far is out of band. So we're taking a copy of production traffic and feeding our tools with it. So there's no impact to production. It's simply a way that we can get visibility into our network. If we look at the upper left gray box where we see DMZ extranet, we can do some security and service chaining, which is really when we start looking at security, and because we're a full software-defined network company, we can dynamically steer traffic as threats are coming through. We can do SSL decryption to feed other tools in the service chain. There's a lot of huge benefits when you're looking at security using our inline solution. Being able to selectively steer that traffic to different services is a huge pain point for some customers, but we can solve that using our solution. And then, of course, in the upper right, we can also tap or span remote locations, as well as the public cloud very shortly. So now, let's kind of summarize a little bit of each of these components, just so you got a clear picture of how we build the actual fabric. So we start out with our controller first. The controller then talks to all the different switches through a management network. And with our controller, they're HA. And using the switches in the fabric, we can leverage these open networking switches. We don't really care on choice of vendor. Whatever is better for you as a customer, we will work with your partners to find out which switch partner or switch vendor works best for you. But they're all the exact same chipsets, which, again, the scale of commodity and the price per port becomes very attractive at that point. So we link all these switches together. It's a zero-touch fabric. So as you connect links between the different switches, the fabric automatically learns the topology. As you provision these switches in the field, they automatically get their firmware. Everything's managed from the controller, and really is zero-touch networking or zero-touch of the actual switch. We then have our service node. So there's certain limitations in those switches of features that we just can't do in the switch itself. So we have a service node, which allows us to get near line rate performance in things like packet deduplication, timestamping, packet slicing, header stripping for VXLAN or MPLS, and there's a couple more items I'm probably forgetting, but we can do this at either 40 gig or 160 gig near line rate using the service node. And we're constantly adding new features, and so as an investment perspective, you buy the service node once, and as we add new features, we don't charge extra for that down the road. We're giving all those features as we come out with them, and because it's just software at that point, it becomes very easy for us to add those features. And then finally, we have our analytics, which is kind of the bread and butter, or the icing on the cake, if you will, of our solution. This gives you a really good idea, especially for customers that don't have some type of analytics platform or NetFlow collector already. We can give you a lot of those benefits and give you an idea in your network to be able to go back and troubleshoot. So you can see things like, hey, there was some latency in the network, or we were seeing some drop packets. We can give you that type of information in this dashboard, and so it makes it easier for you to go back and troubleshoot down the road.
Great overview. So now we're going to go back to Bill, and he's going to walk us through his experience deploying Big Monitoring Fabric for security tools.
Great. Thanks again, Angelique. Hey, Sean, I don't know if you know this, but the reason why we originally started this entire project was because we actually hit the limit of ability to be able to span on multiple devices from a Cisco. And then once we were actually trying to do that, and we did start doing evaluations, we also found that we were dropping about 25% of our packets because of the utilization of the switch. So that's actually what kicked off our entire project. I also wanted to comment on the 3-year CapEx. It looked like you guys had about a 50% reduction in CapEx. Based upon the numbers that I was seeing, it was probably closer to 25%. Non-primary color version of the network packet broker that I was looking at was just had an exorbitant price tag out there. So we're going to start this off with a poll, and the poll here is going to really focus on the idea of security. So how do you use your tap aggregation solution for security? And the questions could range around from, do you use it to feed open source? Do you feed it with commercial tools? Do you use a mix of both? Or do you not use it at all for security and you just utilize it for monitoring and measuring response rates? So go ahead and fill in your answer there, select one, and we'll get back to you with the results. Oh, great. Well, then you came to the right webinar. So about 80% of the people don't have a current tap aggregation solution, and that's the situation we found ourselves in about 2 years ago. And so knowing that, I'll actually customize some of the things that I'm going to say. And then feeding commercial. Okay, good. Well, then there's going to be something in here for everyone. I'm pretty much going to focus on some of the uses of the open source tools and how they've really benefited me greatly. So I think there's going to be something for everyone here in the next couple slides. So first I'm going to talk about what my architecture is. So the purpose of this architecture is to give you an understanding of how the box is deployed and everything. So I've kind of been, I'm not going to go into great detail about this. You guys can look at this later as you wish. But do understand that I'm actually taking interfaces from, I'm taking feeds from VMware, what I consider a high-value assets, so like a database network and security network. And then I have my wireless interface, and my standard server network, the DMZ internal legs, and all of my distribution switches around my campus, both here and then also the same thing in my East Coast operations. And so when I'm able to bring all of those things together, and then once I actually take all of that information into Big Switch, then it's a matter of writing a policy. The policy takes about 3 to 4 minutes to write. You go in and you select where you want it to come from. Usually it's going to be all things, send it through a deduplication, and then send it to a tool. And that entire process is about 3 to 4 minutes. And so that's kind of the architecture that we're going with. And there's a lot of like really awesome things that are built into this slide. But one thing that I'll point out is the fact that I utilize that GRE tunnel. And so that GRE tunnel, I do most of my processing in the East Coast in a security stack, which is the box with a little wrench on it. So I do most of my processing on the yellow wrench box, but occasionally I actually need to bring a flow back here in order in real time to actually do analysis on it and to look at some of the things. And so I actually can utilize that GRE tunnel to take live traffic and send it across. And again, I don't actually have to know what I'm doing in terms of how to actually build a GRE tunnel at a switch layer. I just say I want it to come from this source and I want it to go to this destination. And then the great thing about a software-defined network, which in our case we're using as a switch, as a tap aggregation architecture, it just flows. The data just flows. So I talked about that tool with the yellow wrench on it. So we have multiple sites with direct connections to the internet, and those multiple sites, as they go directly to the internet, that poses a security risk. And so what I wanted to be able to do was take the various data flows that are all going, and then from those data flows, I wanted to be able to perform some analytics on that. And so there's of course, there's any number of vendors who are more than happy to sell me more and more of their boxes to be able to go to the various large sites. So for our larger sites, what we utilize is the Garland taps and the Big Switch, and so there's 2 of those sites. And then for our smaller sites, we just utilize the Garland tap aggregation network. But in all cases, the box is sent locally for analytics. What we utilize Puppet Server, which controls the software and the security stack. Puppet then installs a packet capture TCP dump and configures it appropriate with a couple settings. It also installs Sericata, Bro, and I also have multiple copies running. The name's escaping me right now, but basically I actually run 8 copies of Sericata, and I think it's 12 copies of Bro on the box here locally, and that's what gives me the performance capability in a single box to run this. When I first turned this on in VMware, the first thing that happened was my server administration team, which also has view into the box, came over to me and they were like, dude, this box is at 100%, something's broken. And I was like, no, that's how it's supposed to work. And then, so I did some tuning and then I got it down to about 85 or 90%. But that's exactly how I wanted it. I wanted this box to be very heavily used through Sericata, which we'll get in more detail in a second, in Bro. So we also have a couple services that we add on top of there for indicators of compromise, IOCs, and threat feeds. And so we use ET Pro and Talus for Sericata, and then Critical Stack for Bro. Then we take all these relevant logs and we pick them up locally and we feed them into our SIM as IDS logs. And that gives us a lot of capability for doing some correlation. So when we look at Sericata, Sericata is a free open source tool, which its closest competitor is really Snort. So Snort had some limitations along the way, and so another team said, hey, why don't we actually take and make this a little bit better by including some of the key capabilities of multi-threaded processing and also the capability to take threat feeds. And so that's where Sericata kind of got its start at. And so we utilize Sericata, and as you can see, it comes up with logs like potential SSH scan outbound, malware Mozilla, scan web tools, Tor exit nodes, Tor just passing your network, not actually as an exit node. So it gives us a bunch of different capabilities to see into our traffic flows like that. And so we actually have a belt of suspenders. We actually have an IPS doing IPS functionality, and then this gives us IDS functionality. And ideally, the IPS should get a lot of the data off of the line way before this this IDS, the Sericata, actually gets the, so these are probably a lot more, these are probably reduced up by about 10% or down to about 10% because we have the IPS in place. As I said, we utilize two tools. There's the Bro, which Bro is an amazingly powerful tool. It's like a Swiss Army knife for network packets. And I put up in the upper right-hand corner that try.bro.org. You go out there and you just do some drop-downs, and then from doing those drop-downs, what you'll find is that it just shows you the type of data that you can get out in various types of logs. And we'll be spending a lot of time looking at the Bro type of data and then going back to Sericata at the end. And I think what you'll find is that the data that you can extract out of these tools is pretty robust. So here's an example. I've taken and I've neutralized the dates and a bunch of the IP addresses. I've changed every IP address, so you won't really be able to figure out any of that. But with that being the case, I've actually highlighted 3 logs here. So this is my SOX log, and so if somebody were to try to use a SOX proxy internally, I would actually be able to see that somebody's using a SOX proxy, which of course, as I'm sure you all know, is going to be used to avoid other tools within my organization. So this gives me SOX logs, and then here in the middle box, it's a traceroute log. Usually traceroute is just a normal tool that we security people utilize. But if somebody's utilizing traceroute and enumerating a long list of IPs like that, then that gives me a little bit more concern, because why is this box, which is on my, which is not part of my networking team's IP range, why are they walking the network in that particular way? And then one that I always get questions about every time I bring this up is the weird.log. And so basically what it does is it says there's something weird about that traffic pattern. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to log that. And so you see over here on the right-hand side, DNS unmatched, line terminated without a single carriage return, a truncated TCP payload, those kinds of things. So it just says there's something weird about this particular type of traffic. Maybe you want to look at that. Now we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in some of the ones that give me the highest value. So we have the connection log, the con log as it's called. And so the information that's here, and I've actually made this a lot shorter, neutralized some of the fields and such, but there's basically every connection that is set up, whether it's a UDP or a TCP connection. It tells me things like how long the connection lasted, number of records the state of the history of the connection, so I can find out if it's closed wait, things like that, and when did it actually change from those various ones, the number of packets that sent, and the number of bytes that were sent. And what I utilize this for is if I am actually in the middle of a breach investigation and I want to find out whether somebody double-clicked on a link or opened a file or something, and I want to find out if I do believe that they had a rat installed, a remote access Trojan, then what I'll do is I'll come into this tool and a couple others, and I'll actually start doing a blast radius analysis. So I'll actually look at where they went from that particular computer to anywhere else in the organization, and because they could travel laterally within their own work group, so same 255 different IPs. But anytime they go outside of that, it actually routes through one of our tap points. So they're probably going to pretty quickly want to get outside of their subnet without me, where I would actually see it, and then I can actually watch the blast radius. So when we actually look at blast radius, we're looking at what networks were affected outside and what were they really going for. I found some really interesting things, and I've actually started being able to tell the difference between activities between what it feels like Asian particular versus Eastern European agents, and what they're actually trying to do, and how directly they go for one asset type or another. Next. Another one that came out very useful here recently was a files.log. We knew that there was a particular file in our organization based upon an MD5 and a SHA-256. There was a particular file that we wanted to find out where it had moved to. And so because as long as the data is unencrypted, and that's of course a concern always, it has to be unencrypted. As long as it's unencrypted, we can actually extract the SHA-256, the MD5 hash. And so we were able to pretty trivially come into here and look at where this moved along. If they're utilizing some kind of, like Tor in order to move it around the network or something, obviously it makes it a lot harder. But for the current level of sophistication, this at least gives us a great start to find out where files are moving around our organization, and if there's any kind of blast radius effect from there. Now let's kind of bring all this together. So when I sit there and I'm actually trying to find something, what I actually do is I actually run commands like this. So I'm not going to go in great detail here, but what you can actually see is for the box that's on the top, I say look at the files log and then take out anything that's SSL and then get me the particular MD5 hash and then look at that and across all of my logs in the directory and get me any time that I'm sorry, I said file hash, but I meant connection, which is that third column over as you're looking at on the screen. So get me all the connection history associated with this particular file that was downloaded. And so I can actually go through and I can see that a connection was made, a file was transferred, an HTTP connection was had, and it also generated a weird payload. And so that actually gives me some really, really good information in order to start troubleshooting and looking around and figuring out what's going on. The second one of these is actually pretty nice. What this one does is it actually starts off by looking at any of my Sericata logs. And so the Sericata logs, anything that's a priority 1, I do a bunch of cuts to be able to get the right piece of data out of there. And then once I have it based upon its IP address, then I actually run that through the bro logs. And then I can take 7.8 million lines of logs and I can take it down to 1,200, which actually, if you've ever looked at 1,200 logs on a well-formatted screen, it takes you about a minute or so to figure out exactly where you want to look at. So it's actually pretty fast to be able to do this type of analysis. And so this actually augments whenever my SIM tells me that there was something particularly interesting happening, I utilize these type of techniques in order to be able to explore in and out and figure out if this was just kind of like, one of our employees just kind of like moving around the network, or was it actually something more nefarious that I actually want to keep an eye out for? So that brings us to our third poll. Our third poll is what functions of your current solution do you use? Most of you don't have a network packet broker, so a lot of you will select that top option. But there's also the capability to utilize things like packet masking, slicing, deduplication, header stripping, header stripping is pretty amazing because you can actually, like if it's an encasement, so if you're actually doing analysis on mobile networks, cellular networks, IPv6, GRE tunnels, IP and IP, all that's in the header stripping. Deep packet inspection, and finally NetFlow generation. I'll give you a couple seconds to make your selection.
Hey Bill, I got a question while we're waiting. So I know, bro, you can do a lot of clustering and really make it complex or build it out really scalable, right? How difficult would that be without a packet broker?
Well, you're limited by just the sheer amount of CPU capability of an individual box, and so I bought a box that had a fairly robust, which was able to take care of my network. My network would be considered by most organizations a medium size. If I were to increase my network bandwidth by even 20%, I would definitely have to scale onto a second box. And even though I utilize that technology to actually spin up 10 instances of Bro on an individual box and spray the traffic across 10 instances of Bro, at some point I'm going to run out of CPU on the individual box. And so that's where I get a lot of value from Big Switch. What I can actually do is I can actually have 2 boxes in parallel, and those 2 boxes in parallel will actually then give me the capability to go through and actually have the data go to both places, and then it just generates logs and moving those logs to one common place so I can do the same searching. So I currently haven't had that problem, but that is part of my expansion, which I may have to do in about a year from now. Sean, did that answer your question? Anything to follow up on that?
No, thank you. That was great. I didn't understand that, so thanks for putting that out there.
Great. So we have the result from the poll back. So like expected, a fair number of people don't have a network backup broker, but a lot of people utilize it for NetFlow generation, which is great. I actually talk about that in a couple slides. I'm actually surprised that no one selected deduplication. That seemed to be one of the common things that everyone needs out of the solution. Packet masking is very nice inside of PCI environments and such. So I wanted to actually, I put this slide up here because one of the amazing things that became very, very powerful, so the box itself, Big Switch, without the service node, without the analytics engine, the box itself just actually starts recording some really interesting data. So I just went through and replaced my DNS and DHCP infrastructure. And our organization has grown up for many, many, many years with everyone kind of doing their own thing, and we're just kind of bringing it all under one shop. So because I was actually utilizing the Big Switch environment, I was able to trivially go out and list where my DHCP servers are, what subnets were they serving, what was the times used associated with it, and in most cases, I actually knew more about what their DHCP and DNS servers were actually doing than they did as the server administrator. And that's the kind of visibility that it gave trivially kind of out of the box. Then we start adding on things like the service node, which discusses all those things. And those are all the things that Big Switch gives you out of the box with the big monitoring fabric. So it gives you that capability through the service node, and all of those things, as Sean said, they're going to continue to add on to more of those things, and they're all just part of that box. When you buy the box, you get all of them for one. And that was actually what really caused our price to scream up for our orange vendor. The analytics engine was extremely nice. As you can see, they've just released a 2.0 version. I was using the 1.0 version forever. I'm getting to the 2.0 version this week. And that analytics engine actually was very useful a couple times to be able to understand what were traffic patterns like. And so what it does is it actually utilizes NetFlow in order to generate a lot of this information. And then that information is pretty trivial to drill into and then be able to make reports and things very, very quickly. So if you don't have that ability currently, this is a very, very simple and easy way of doing it. And again, because you're capturing data from so many locations, it all comes into one. It comes into one dashboard, which actually has all that information. And something that I'm not using yet, but we're looking at deploying a various version of a CASB solution, and so we may actually be looking at an inline deployment there. So I wanted to bring that up just so you guys could understand that these other functions that I haven't really talked about, those are huge things for me and give me a lot of the capability that I'm currently doing, but we're focused on security here today. And so finally, like I talked about before, the enabling the other teams was a huge part of what the second round of accolades was around here. So the first time, when I first deployed the solution and I came and I was able to start seeing data and I was able to start doing breach analysis and gave a lot of functionality that just wasn't here before, a lot of people were like, it's a nice solution, it's a nice tool, well done. And then other teams started hearing about this and then they started asking questions. So is there ability for me to grab packets from that particular thing, because we're actually doing some troubleshooting of a packet issue. We're actually looking at service timings and troubleshooting why the network is slow during this particular time. And so those types of things is pretty nice to be able to hand that type of data stream over to people. And so now we've actually stood up a separate box from every other box, which does nothing but TCP dump, and then the people will go in and change one rule and specify what it is they're looking for. Are they looking for a subnet, an IP address? Are they looking for a particular port? Are they looking for it from just one building, from multiple buildings? And they can make all those settings, and they're very easy to understand. And then suddenly they get just that one flow down into a TCP dump box, and so suddenly they just run TCP dump on the interface and they get all that data, and it's pre-filtered. And so they can do that in a matter of like minutes. Training them, this was the network team initially, training them was something that took a matter of minutes. So that was very nice. And then in addition to that, we also can take all of our data and send it to a packet logger, like a packet capturing device for long-term storage. And so that's something we're going to be looking at the end of this year, because we know that there's times where we may want to go back a couple days and recreate the entire network situation so we can actually see what happened. Blast radius analysis on steroids, kind of. And the bottom one was actually really, really nice. We couldn't figure out why boot P wasn't working after we did a change, and we were just going and could not find the answer. And then once we actually were like, hey, well, why don't we just use Big Switch to get this? So we actually just said we want to capture it from these 3 points on our network and send it down here to TCP dump, which was what the initiation of that TCP dump I told you was. And it was great to be able to have that 3 points of the network, send it all to one, and see all that data in one box trivially, and we didn't have to do additional weird motions. And we have also used it for troubleshooting packet out of order issue. So here I want to just give you some closing thoughts. So Big Switch gave me the ability to look deeply into my network and actually understand a lot about what was going across my network, and actually have a good understanding of that, to be able to take that data and actually do more analytics on it, be able to run it against multiple tools, and then be able to take that data and be able to log that data to my SIM. And so it was a very easy solution to use, a very easy solution to learn and to teach others. And so when we talk about value, it's easily exceeded even my most aggressive estimates for value, and that's just because the solution just keeps growing as I grow. It has more functionalities every month or so. They do additional releases, and then my actual ability to use many of the features grows. So I've just been really happy with the solution as it provides me value to my organization.
Great, thank you, Bill. That was a really interesting overview of your deployment. So we have a couple of questions that came in, and I'm going to go ahead and tee those up here. One question that I had for you earlier, you were mentioning spraying of the traffic to the tools. Was that PF ring or NTOP that you're referring to?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I could remember NTOP, but PF ring was exactly what I was thinking of. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so one question that we had was how long it took to build your security stack solution.
Yeah, great question. I think the hardest part was actually trying to figure out exactly how to make NTOP NG PF ring, the commercial version, work with a driver set. So there was a driver issue, which turned out to be, once you actually understand all of the things you have to do, was rather trivial. But that probably took a month on its own, and then building Puppet out probably took 2 weeks. Getting the threat intel was about another 2 weeks. So I'd say about 2 months in total to be able to get our first box. Obviously, after our first box, then it just takes a couple of days to get every additional box. Even into the remote sites now, it's probably, as we're deploying those now, it's probably about a 4-hour process to stand up and get a security stack box out to one of our small remote sites.
Cool. Okay, so another question that we have is what functions you found most and least useful from Big Switch?
What functions I find most and least useful?
Yes.
Great. I've talked a lot about them. Obviously, the ability to duplicate data and send it to multiple ones. One that I thought I was going to use initially, and Sean being my sales engineer way back a year and a half ago or so. Sean, I think, I don't know if you're ready to talk about it, but can you say a couple words about the ability to send, to stream a single stream of data onto multiple security boxes like I was talking about? Because I actually haven't had to do that yet, but I do know that like existing solutions utilizing 1 gig interfaces, that was something I thought I was going to have to do, but we ended up going a different direction.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So I think what you're referring to is, let's say you're tapping or spanning 10 gig ports, but you've got 1 gig tools, legacy, investments in those 1 gig tools. You want to keep using those without having to throw them out or upgrade them. So what we can do with the Big Switch fabric is take that 10 gig feed and split that feed into multiple 1 gig streams across those different boxes and load balance to your different tools, so that you can still leverage that investment even as you're upgrading your infrastructure.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. So those, that's one thing that I haven't used just because I haven't had a need. And then some of the capability with the ability to do some header stripping, packet masking, but it's really just a fact that I haven't had that need yet. It's not that it was a least useful feature. Every environment's different, but in terms of the most valuable, it's not really as much of a feature as much as a design criteria. The solution just kind of comes out of the box with a lot of intuitive interfaces. So people who have been working on a network for even a couple of years will understand that. So I think between the ability to send the data to many boxes, to deduplicate the data to many boxes, and having a simple user interface are probably 2 of my favorite things about Big Switch.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about the service node in terms of how you deploy or basically Big Switch deploys these advanced features versus having them be on box distributed, which you might find with another vendor? So just in terms of like a service node architecture, how has that benefited you?
One thing that was interesting, due to initially when we rolled the solution out, we had to split most of our data in our data center was going to be local in the data center, but then our service node was actually going to be across our campus. And so we happened to put this in as part of a 10 gig backbone upgrade project. And so when we did this 10 gig backbone upgrade project, I reserved 2 two fiber pairs, so total four fibers. And by doing that between the triangle, and by doing that, that actually gave me 80 gigabits of traffic between the two buildings, and a total of 240 gigabits around my entire three-building architecture. So that being the case, our architecture for that was that most of our traffic was actually generated on one side. Then it went over to another building through that 80 gig link and got deduplicated, and that was the only thing that I was using at the time. And now we're actually utilizing the ability to generate NetFlow traffic as well. And so then those two things are now being done. And then the data sent back over to my data center for processing. So that was actually a strange architecture in terms of how we had to roll out the architecture, but we may be changing that soon. But it doesn't really matter, just because of the way that Big Switch and particularly the uplink ports work. They work so well that you can just move that data. And like I said, I mean, all I had to do was say source, service, and destination, and it just figures out how to make that flow happen. So it was trivial to be able to do that, which was quite nice because it was a strange architecture.
Awesome. Yeah, okay, so we have several other questions, but we're actually out of time. So for those of you who we haven't been able to address during this broadcast, we will follow up with you directly. For closing purposes, just note that if something we discussed piqued your interest or you'd like to learn more, go ahead and head over to our website. It's bigswitch.com, or you can send us an email at info@bigswitch.com. We make it very easy for you to get started with our Big Switch solutions. There are several resources you can download or you can watch that will provide a tour of our products on our site. We also have BSN Labs, and this is where you can experience Big Switch Network's open networking SDN solutions hands-on. So go ahead and visit the lab at labs.bigswitch.com to get complimentary access. So coming up next on our webinar schedule is the second part of our graphical user interface webinar featuring our GUI architect, Cedric Hobbs, and that is Accelerating Network Operations with Big Cloud Fabric GUI. Again, that's part 2. You can see part 1. It's already archived on our website. And to view other past webinars, go to bigswitch.com/webinars. And we will also be posting this online very shortly, so you can check it out there. That concludes our presentation for today. Thank you to all of our speakers. We look forward to all of the attendees today joining us next time. Thank you very much.